Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LEC Round 1 overview and analysis of all three series that we got in Round 1. Both of the upper bracket series, the losers bracket series. All of it will be covered in this video. We'll be going over some predictions at the end, some matchup analysis for the other matchups we're going to be getting in the playoffs here, so stick around for that if you are interested in how I predict Round 2 and even the semi-final matchup, the winners finals matchup to go. But first, we're going to be going over all three of the series that we have already seen in the LEC in Round 1. If you guys are excited for that, let me know down in the comment section below how you felt about all of these series. There were a lot of really good games in these series, and I'm excited to talk about them today, but let me know how you felt about them down in the comments section below. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into our first series of the LEC playoffs, and that was our 2-seeded Rogue team taking on our 3-seeded Mad Lions team. Now, a pretty interesting matchup here. Now, these two faced off twice in the regular season, just like everybody else in the LEC, but Rogue was actually able to take both of these games. Now, Mad Lions was a better team in the regular season in terms of record, but of course, LEC playoffs or at least summer playoffs are seeded based off of championship points. And so, just because Mad finished significantly worse than Rogue in spring, it means that Rogue actually ended up with the higher seed here, and therefore, side selection. They also had a little bit of a handle on them in the regular season, like I said, but Mad honestly looked like the better team. It very much feels like their meta. We've been talking about this all year long. There really isn't a meta that could ever fit this Mad Lions team better than the one we are in currently, and so I actually predicted Mad Lions to win this, maybe not super cleanly, but a 3-1, a 3-2. I expected Mad to be able to take care of business, even though they haven't really been able to all year long, but Rogue definitely not going to go down without a fight. We know they were able to put up in the playoffs when things matter. So, what happened in this series? Well, let's go ahead and jump right into game number 1. And game number 1 was a Mad Lions win. So they do take the first game of the series here. A really good game overall, I'd say, for Mad Lions. They played a really good game, mostly because I think their draft is really not all that great. You do take the Lucian Nami, and we see this quite a bit as, especially in the Western regions, as a just, we want to go early kind of pick. Now, there are more picks that can do that, and often we see the Sivir Zeri handshake in some of the other regions, but Lucian definitely has a much higher priority, especially here in the LEC, which we'll get to throughout the video. They go to that, and they really want to be able to get this lead and be able to snowball it essentially out of control. They put Niski on his Talia, one of his best picks throughout the entirety of the split here, and he rewards them by doing the things that got him the MVP in the first place, being super proactive across the map, playing really well with Elyoya to generate leads, especially for his bottom lane where they really wanted to invest in. Unforgiven was definitely the one that was supposed to carry this game, and he did a very good job with that. Now, it wasn't just as simple as give Unforgiven gold and have the game end. Rogue definitely still fought back, and they got to a point where Dragon Soul was kind of on the menu for Mad Lions. They were really in control, and if Rogue even wanted some sort of lifeline in this game, Comp was going to have to take over a Dragon Soul fight. So they go ahead and take that, but unfortunately, Malrang tries to get a little bit too cheeky with some Hexgate plays and just ends up not being in the right spot. Very weird play from him, and Mad Lions ends up pretty much dominating that fight, ends up getting the soul, ends up just running the game from there, and that was pretty much it. Mad Lions did a really good job of the early game to set up their comp, but it wasn't quite, super duper easy, and then in the late game, Rogue had some questionable plays. Mad Lions definitely able to take advantage of that, and they were able to win the game. Now, a lot of people are going to want to give Unforgiven player of the game here, and I get it, he was the main damage dealer, especially in the back half of these fights, but I'm going to give player of the game to Arma in the top lane, and this might seem a little weird. Malrang actually invested a ton into Arma in the top lane. They really wanted to get that Renekton going on the side of Rogue, and so Malrang was top lane really trying to make the Ornn's life a living hell, and they did get some stuff in the early game from Arma, but he played these late game team fights so perfectly. I talked about this a lot in the regular season, where it really felt like Arma was kind of the biggest hindrance that was stopping this team from just clearly being the #1 team in the region. He really stepped up in this game on the Ornn. His ultimates in the back half were absolutely ginormous, and really made it a lot easier for a short-range shady carry like Lucian, or someone like Talia, who really isn't all that rangy herself, to be able to make a lot of these plays in the back half of the game against something like a Zeri. Arma really did a great job of that, and for absorbing pressure, for being able to translate even a loss back into a lead, and then being so useful towards the back half of the game. He very much deserves, in my opinion, the player of the game here in game number 1. But you do have to give credit where credit is due. Unforgiven did a great job in the mid to late game, being able to translate that early game lead evolution into damage. Niski did a great job of setting up a lot of the rest of his team. Even Kaiser did a great job on the Nami of making sure that things were going smoothly. Elyoya had a good game. Everybody played relatively well here on Mad Lions. As for Rogue, you were in this game. It certainly wasn't like a complete blowout. Even if the early game did go in favor of Mad, and then the late game also went in favor of Mad, they actually did a really good job in the mid game to pull back some gold. Malrang was going top lane, trying to get some gold on himself and Otoamne. It didn't really work in the way that he wanted it to, so they had to kind of cancel the Renekton plan and go more into that Zeri Yuumi lane, which of course, why not go into the Zeri Yuumi lane? It's the strongest lane in the game right now, so Malrang really starts to invest in that. Comp definitely gets some gold on him, even if he's a little bit out of position sometimes. Larson's not all that bad at frontlining, and you get to the point where you can at least fight for some of the dragons in the back half of the game. Unfortunately, like I said, Malrang plays some of those fights pretty poorly. Comp gets hit with the Ornult and really isn't able to do all that much, and then the game is over. So, a little bit tough on them. My dud of the game is going to go to Malrang. Like I said, in the early game, he just invested too much into this Renekton in a matchup that really is on the Ornn to lose. Like I talk about the Renekton Ornn lane being kind of neutral for both lanes, and that's because I really don't think it's all that easy for either to kill. I think if Ornn plays super aggressive, Renekton is in a place to be able to kill him, but if Ornn just plays passive, Renekton really can't do much about that, even with jungle attention. So really, really interesting there that they decided to go heavily into the top lane, and they did get some, but just not enough to make it worthwhile. And then Unforgiven, unfortunately, just got too far ahead because Niski was outplaying Larson in the mid lane. But overall, a pretty good game, I think, from both teams. Not the most dominant from either. I think Mad definitely played it really, really well. Just definitely some things they can fix up. I think Elyoya certainly had some plays on Trundle that I just want to see him be more aggressive. But outside of that, Arma, took the pressure and redistributed it in a good way, and then Unforgiven did everything he could on that Lucian. So overall, good game for Mad. Rogue really just needs to change their approach. I honestly don't even think the draft is all that bad. Everyone knows I'm not really a huge fan of Renekton right now, and I'm definitely not a huge fan of Jarvan. I think both of those picks are relatively weak. I really don't think you're going to be getting a lot out of those two. If you just kind of change your approach up a bit, maybe go for something a little bit more supportive in the jungle, something like a Poppy if it's up. I think that could be good. You yourself banned out the Wukong and the Vi and just let Elyoya pick the Trundle, so maybe go to that, and then something a little bit more safe in the top lane. I get why you would want to go Renekton, maybe push the early game advantage outside of the Lucian Nami lane, but unfortunately it just isn't going to work out when the mid laner is going to win this hard. So a few adaptations that I would want or expect to see from Rogue moving into game number 2. And game number 2 was definitely an interesting one. The winner of game number 2 was Rogue. Rogue ended up taking this game number 2, bouncing back here, going 1-1 in the series. Definitely a more even look here, I think, from both of these teams. Rogue definitely played it a lot better, and you got to give credit to a lot of the players that were struggling in that first game. Malrang, especially, I thought played a really good game here. Back on the Jarvan. They go back to the Jarvan Renekton, but this time they don't overforce a lot of those engages. A lot of the times that Otoamne is able to take advantage of Arma in the top lane, it's when Arma is pushed up on a much less safe pick than the Ornn here in the Kennen, something that Arma just quite frankly isn't nearly as proficient on, at least from what we've seen over the course of the last couple of years. And so definitely a good adaptation there. Maybe not from Rogue, but a bad one from Mad Lions. They go back to the Lucian Nami, but this time Rogue counters with the Sivir instead of the Zeri. I think this gives you just a tad bit more lane pressure, if not a little bit less in the late game, but overall, I don't think it's all that different. I think, honestly, Comp and Trimby just played the lane much better. I think Larson had a much better grasp of the mid lane, really stopping Niski from taking over the map on that Taliyah like he did in game 1. And Comp was able to get a gold lead here, and really once Comp got that gold lead, it was game over. Sivir Yuumi can be incredibly disgusting from ahead, and that's what we saw in this game, is that Sivir and Yuumi together, just as good as Zeri Yuumi. Yuumi really is a problem in the meta right now that you do have to ban, because if she gets on one of these late game hyper carries, whether it be Zeri, whether it be Sivir, hell, whether it even be something like a Draven, it can be really difficult to actively deal with that carry, and it makes your job a lot harder, I think, overall. It didn't work out for game 1, but it definitely works out here in game 2. I'm going to give player of the game to Comp here on the Sivir. A very good game from him. Not only does he generate the lead against a Lucian Nami lane that generally should have pressure in this lane, but he does a very good job of translating that lead into the late game where he can take over the game. You got to give props to Trimby as well. A very good game from him. Only so much you can do on the Yuumi, but obviously being able to block a lot of Lucian damage, a lot of Nami bubbles potentially, and then hopping right back on without even really being in all that much of a danger. You can do a lot of cool stuff with the Yuumi, and obviously just the impact that champion has in general is going to make your team stronger. But a really good game from Malrang, I really want to point out, just because Comp and Trimby were like the main focus of Rogue this game, and they definitely deserve to be the players of the game, Comp especially. Malrang also had a very good bounce back here on the Jarvan. A lot better of a macro sense here, being able to, you know, kind of invest in the top lane, but once he realized that Renekton had that lane on lock, he was able to roam a lot with Larsen's Ahri, be able to create a lot of the pressure that Nisqy was able to create in game 1 to help out his bot lane, to make sure Comp got online, and to make sure that Comp was in a good spot. So a much better game from Malrang, not nearly the kinds of mistakes that he was making in that game 1. Larsen winning the mid lane, Odo crushing top lane, which we will get to later, but overall, just a really good game from Rogue, and definitely the bounce back that you would have wanted to see as a Rogue fan. As for Mad Lions, definitely not as clean as you would have wanted this to be. You run back basically the same comp from game 1, with the exception of the Kennen in the top lane instead of the Ornn. Now, the Ornn was a very integral piece in how those team fights went in the later half of that game. Those ultimates were absolutely massive, but I can see why you would think that replacing, you know, Ornn with Kennen really wouldn't be all that big of a deal. Those Kennen flanks could be just as deadly, if not even more so, than the Ornn ults, and be able to get on that Sivir in a more effective manner, obviously, depending on how she played the fight. So I can see where going to Kennen definitely felt like a good idea. Unfortunately, Armut did not play this game well at all. We got playoff Armut in game 1. We got regular season Armut in game number 2. He's going to get my dud of the game here on the Kennen. Completely outplayed by Odoamne in the top lane matchup. And then even on those flanks in the last half of the game, like, I don't even know if he, like, actively hit an ultimate at any point in this game. It was really, really rough. Armut really just died so fast and had almost zero impact on this game that it was a little bit disappointing to watch. I'm not saying he was the only reason they lost, because like I said, Unforgiven and Kaiser definitely didn't play the Lucian Nami lane nearly as effectively, although they also didn't have the same amount of pressure coming from their jungle, or, you know, they had more pressure coming from the enemy jungle as well. And then Nisqy definitely lost in the mid lane. It wasn't just Armut, but Armut being a complete non-factor in this game was definitely a problem for Mad Lions. They missed out on a lot of extra CC coming out from that Kennen ultimate, and just damage in general by not having him, you know, even be remotely relevant in the game. So overall, Armut definitely done of the game. Really, the only player on Mad that I think played relatively okay was Elyoya, who I think did some interesting things throughout the game. Definitely tried to take advantage of some of the mispositioning mistakes that I think Comp and Trimby had towards the back half. Definitely want to make sure Unforgiven and Kaiser weren't completely left out to dry, but at the end of the day, Malrang just played the map better, and so Elyoya just didn't have a lot of opportunity to go in and dominate the game quite like he wanted to. Like I said, Nisqy got outplayed, Unforgiven and Kaiser kind of got outplayed in the 2v2, and Armut got destroyed by Odoamne in the 1v1, and then just didn't really have any impact in the late game. Anyways, so yeah, a very good game from Rogue, but not so good of a game from Mad Lions. What does this mean for the outlook of these two teams? Well, now we're sitting at 1-1. You're looking at a best of 3 that definitely favors, I think, both teams. I think both teams are going to go into that with some renewed confidence. Both teams kind of feel, I think, like they could be able to win the series. Rogue, obviously, with a little bit more momentum just because they 2-0'd Mad in the regular season, but Mad Lions should feel like they have a lot to offer here. Just because they weren't able to win on this comp doesn't mean that they can't transition maybe into a more late game focused comp, get rid of something like the Kennen. Maybe Armut doesn't have nearly as bad of a game, go back to something like the Ornn if they allow it, have the Lucian Nami maybe switch out for something a little bit more proactive in that lane, and you can do a lot more. As for Rogue, I still don't love the draft. I don't love the Jarvan Renekton, but if it's going to work for you, if you're going to be able to dominate the laning phase like you did in this game, you can go to that, because you can rely on something like a Sivir to carry your late game, even if you have some more early game topside. So, you know, even if I don't love the draft, I can definitely see what they're going for with it. Either way, both of these teams definitely need to show adaptation. You're definitely not going to win with this strategy over and over and over again. These two teams are too even for that. So, can they show that adaptation? Can they adapt and show up here in Game 3? Which team is going to take that 2-1 series lead and put themselves, honestly, in a really good spot? It is going to be Mad Lions that take Game 3 here, and a really, really good game for Mad overall. Not the most clean game, I would say, but the fact that they didn't have to be so clean and it still never mattered was super impressive to me. I really want to commend Mad Lions for, honestly, a really, really phenomenal early game from them. This is something that we've seen from them throughout the split, is that when their early games go really well for this team, they have often set themselves up into a position where they can just kind of win the game with their macro sense at that point. And it's definitely a different looking comp here. You got Unforgiven on the Kalista. I really like this pick, and we'll get to Rogue's draft in a bit because it's definitely unique, but it certainly can win this matchup, and especially with the Nautilus, gives you so much pressure, pretty much against really whatever you want to go into. It gives you basically triple engage once you hit level 6, which is a lot of really, really good pressure that I think you can put pretty much on any lane, depending on who you are. There's really no comp in the game that can counter that in the same way that you can counter a lot of other bot lane engages throughout the game. But I got to give a lot of credit here to Elyoya in the early game, because a phenomenal Poppy game from Elyoya coming out here really, really was able to take advantage of what was a very sus matchup here in the bot lane. The Jin Yuumi coming out from Rogue, which we'll talk about. Obviously, they should have learned from MSI, but they did not. Malrang also trying to give some attention down towards the bottom lane. Comp actually doing a good job of staying alive, but for the most part, Malrang was not. Elyoya did a great job of being able to catch out Malrang, basically hand feed kills to Unforgiven on that Kalista and get that Kalista really roaming out of control and being a problem not only in lane but out of lane as well around pretty much every single objective fight. There was really no way to contest a lot of these things, and a lot of that was just due to Elyoya's positioning, but you got to give Unforgiven the credit where it's due. He played the Kalista really, really well. He's going to get my player of the game here on the Kalista. Very good game from Unforgiven. Definitely happy to see him come out, pick up something like a Kalista. We know that he can play it. He played it a lot in spring. Kind of fell off of that pick a little bit in summer, mostly because Kalista just wasn't the same kind of impact that she was earlier in the year, but still a very good game from him here. They pair it up with Kaiser on the Nautilus, who can be proactive, can really go out there and make plays, and it's a really non-mobile team coming out from Rogue, and so a lot of ways for, I would say the Nautilus, I should say, to be able to get on the enemy team and really be able to punish a lot of the positioning mistakes, and Kalista obviously follows that up so effortlessly, so very, very good from them. Niski has a much better game in the mid lane here, a much better matchup for him as he goes for the Sylas into Larsen's Victor. Obviously, we know Larsen is a very, very good control mage player, Victor being one of his picks that he's always gone back to pretty much in whatever meta, but man, I just don't know if Victor is something you can actively play in this meta, in a meta where, especially against someone like Niski, he's going to be roaming, he's going to be making macro plays, he's going to be at every objective first. Victor's just not that kind of champion. He's wave clear, stay in mid lane, and then team fight 5v5, and that's really just not the meta that we're in right now, and Niski's able to take advantage of that, move around with Elyoya significantly more, create a lot more pressure around a lot of the objectives on the map, and honestly just play a better game, but really it was Unforgiven, Elyoya, and Niski that I think really dominated this game. Gotta shout out Arma, too. He definitely played well in the top lane, much better in this 1v1 matchup. Malrang with significantly less pressure into that matchup, and so Kennen actually plays the Renekton matchup really, really well. It's pretty Kennen favored as long as you get the 1v1, at least in my opinion, because you can really just not be in danger as long as you know how the Renekton wants to play, and Arma, I thought, played it well. You can make fun of both Armut and Elyoya a bit in this game because I don't think either one of them had a good ultimate at any point in this game. And, Kennen not having a good ultimate would usually spell, like, Kennen not playing well that game, but he played the laning phase fine, and honestly, his damage was fine in the late game, and there was really not a lot of ways for Rogue to punish anyways, and so it really didn't need, the Kennen didn't really need to exist in this game, and that was kind of proven. It was really just the Kalista and the Poppy that really took over the back half of these fights. Also the Nautilus, gotta give a shout out to the Nautilus, but a good game for Mad Lions. Unforgiven player of the game. Elyoya played well, even if he couldn't hit an ultimate, and then Niski and Kaiser, definitely very good supportive pieces. As for Rogue, I hate this draft. I hate this draft with a burning passion. I can't explain why I hate this draft. There's just, it just doesn't, I don't know, I just don't know what it gives you in this meta. You lack a lot of the playmaking potential that I think is really, really popular right now, especially going into the playmaking team in the LEC here. You go with the Victor in the mid lane, you go with the Jin Yuumi, which clearly they did not learn from T1 at MSI when they pulled it out and completely shit the bed on it, proved that that lane really doesn't do anything. The Kalista dominated those two in the 2v2 matchup, and then when it was the 3v3 with jungle attention, it really was even less close in that respect, because what is Comp going to do to help Malrang, not die on those engages? Like, Kalista just has significantly more CC, she has more damage. Honestly, you could argue that she has more survivability purely because of the Nautilus and the Poppy coming in. Like, it's just a very difficult sell to convince me that this was a good pick here. Jhin has not been picked in any region all year long for a reason. It's because burst ADCs just aren't all that good right now. The DPS coming out of the really strong AD carries is just so strong that being able to match up with them by, bursting them down just really isn't all that viable right now in the meta, and having that utility really just isn't all that good. So it did not work in this game. Comp, I thought, played it as well as he could, but it just was never going to matter. Like, he was on such a champion disadvantage that it really was never going to be helpful. And then Larssen again in the mid lane on a champion that just wants to sit mid, push the wave, get CS, and then teamfight in the late game. Going up against a Sylas who just does a great job of negating a lot of teamfight strengths and also being able to roam to objectives first. And also, it's Nisqy. Like, what did you expect to happen here? Not a good draft in my opinion. Malrang played the mid game really, really poorly. I talked about him going bot lane and basically giving over gold over and over again. He definitely did that. Mad Lions had a very good early game, and a lot of that was due to Malrang getting caught out and Elyoya just outplaying him on the Poppy. So Malrang is going to get my dud of the game here in game number 3. Not a good one on Trundle. Definitely he needs to bounce back. Really, a lot of the problems here, though, I think were, they were Malrang, but it was the sense of what is Malrang really going to do on this map, right? Like, where does he go? Does he invest in the Renekton in the top lane? That could be fruitful, but if Sylas starts roaming bot like the game 1 that they had, then all of a sudden, like, you're in a really bad spot because Victor's never really going to match, and you have a numbers disadvantage with a Kalista lane, and that's really never good. But if you invest in any of the other lanes, you really don't win the 2v1 here, because the Sylas is just going to be able to move around, and obviously if Poppy's there, you get obliterated in that 2v2. And then if you go bot lane, you definitely lose the 3v3, which we saw over and over again. So not really a lot of great options for Malrang in this game, and unfortunately that means he's going to get the dud of the game because he did try to force them. And so really, really unfortunate from him, but I really just don't like this draft at all. So overall, I definitely think there are some avenues for Rogue to improve this game. The draft is definitely improvable, but even just the gameplay, I think, is definitely improvable. Maybe Malrang not forcing as much and hopefully not losing as much in the early game should help them out a lot. As for Mad Lions, they've really proven that if they can get that lead in the early game, if they can generate an advantage, especially in the mid lane for Nisqy to be able to roam around with Elyoya, be able to create numbers advantages in the bottom lane, they're really unbeatable and unstoppable in that regard. It's really just about doing that consistently. So, is that something that they are going to be able to do consistently? Well, now we can jump into game number 4, and it's obviously win or go home here for Rogue. If they do not win, they fall down to loser's bracket, which is not the ideal place that they would probably want to be. And so they have to win this game 4. Can they win it? They do. They do win this game 4, and they push it to a Silver Scrapes game 5. We've been getting a ton of these in the playoffs in pretty much every region. It's been an absolute blast. And in our first series here in the LEC playoffs, we get one as well. A very good game from Rogue here, based off their 2 carry roles. Larssen and Comp played out of their minds in this game. You have to respect the bounce back here. Obviously, Larssen's not had the most impactful series, I would say, so far, but he gets on Ahri, kind of a good classic pick for Larssen, something that's a little bit in the middle of that control mage meta, and also being something that you can be actively proactive on. I think this is a really good pick for Larssen that I would expect them to go back to if it's up pretty much all the time, because he had a phenomenal game here on the Ahri. He's going to get my player of the game here. Just completely outplayed Nisqy in the mid lane. Nisqy gets put on this more team fight oriented mid laner, and I get that this is a little bit up his alley, but really, it's taking a lot of the proactivity out of what he does. They themselves were the ones to ban out the Taliyah in this game, which I really do not understand. I don't think Mad in any world should ever ban out Taliyah in this series, not only because it's Nisqy's best champion, but also because Larssen has shown that he does not play the Taliyah all that well. And so, if they want to pick it, like, great. Like, let him pick it. They're not really going to be able to take advantage on it. Instead, he's able to get the Ahri here in the mid lane, and he's really able to take over the game against the Swain, I should say, because Swain doesn't have nearly the same kind of roaming impact that something like an Ahri does. She can show up in the lane, ult in, charm, be able to create a lot of plays, and she did that at multiple points on the map here. Malrang was also really good here on the Jarvan, going back to that signature pick of his, the Jarvan here. Even if I don't think Jarvan's all that good right now, if you play it well, you play it well. He goes back onto that. They try to make a lot of plays around Dragon, and most specifically around bot lane. Whether it be Malrang, Larssen, and Trimby helping out Comp, trying to get him kills. Whether it be Malrang trying to get Larssen kills in the mid lane, which absolutely happens. Really, we just get to the point where by 15 minutes, this game feels very over. It very much feels like Rogue has complete control, and a lot of that is Larssen playing really well. And then you have to credit Comp. The Lucian Nami lane can be very good, but can also be very bad. We've seen that in this series, and honestly, Kalista Leona is a lane that is kind of designed to be able to punish that, at least in some way, shape, or form. But Comp played it perfectly, basically denying Kalista's CS all game long. The Leona had zero impact because she was always afraid of getting blown up by the Lucian because of the Nami there. And it really created this situation where Comp was able to zone out Unforgiven from really playing the game at all. By the time the mid game came around, Malrang and Larson were coming bot lane and creating pressure down there, being able to secure pretty much every dragon, being able to make sure that that tower was gone basically in an instant. And Unforgiven's game was just generally over. Comp played it basically perfectly, and you have to give him a lot of credit for that. He's been one of the best players in the LEC all year long, and he continued that in this game here. Trimby also helped out quite a bit, but I really think this game for me was Larson and Comp really dominating the game, and then Malrang, Trimby, and Odo really helping out kind of in the more insular ways. But as for Mad Lions, not a great game. Like, you really were able, like, this was a game where you could end the series, you could go up, 3-1, take down your big rival here in the playoffs and put yourself in a good spot. And then you draft Swain, you draft Gwen, and I don't hate the Gwen pick, like, don't get me wrong, I think Gwen is certainly playable, but you really have to, like, know what you're getting into here. You go into the Ornn, and Odo's honestly just the better player in this matchup, so Odo gets the lead in this matchup. Elyoya gets out-jungled heavily by Malrang in terms of pressure. Niski just, there's no way he's going to be able to do anything into the Ahri, because by the time the Swain is able to actually deal with the Ahri, it's like 25 minutes into the game. And then Unforgiven gets zoned off the entire wave because Comp just outplays him. There's really no other way to put it. So Larson was my player of the game. Unforgiven's going to get my dud of the game here. I don't think you can blame him entirely for how this lane went, but also he just got beat, and he got beat hard, so more so than pretty much anybody in the game. I think you could realistically give this to Elyoya as well, but Unforgiven was just completely zoned off of the wave, and it created a situation where he just had zero impact in the mid to late game. Like, it was pretty smooth sailing from Rogue after, I'd say, 10 minutes. Even if Mad had a small lead, they did a good job relatively in the early game. Like, from that point onwards, it was Rogue, 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 Rogue all the time. No-brainer, super easy. So, at the end of the day, it's a good win for Rogue. You're going to be happy about that. But Mad Lions certainly wanted this win. And now we're going to a Game 5. Rogue has a little bit more momentum, I would certainly say, going into this. But we know that one good draft from Mad basically creates a winning scenario for them. I want them to go away from the Swain, hell, even go away from the Kalista, maybe go back to something that feels a little bit more natural. I know a lot of teams in this meta are prioritizing the Lucian Nami. I don't really agree. I think Sivir Zeri are significantly more powerful, even into the Lucian Nami than something like that, but if they're both banned out, I definitely understand. Definitely some draft differences, I would say, for Mad Lions, I would more so expect. For Rogue, I think they've really found a sweet spot here. If they can get, Malrang on Jarvan, where he definitely feels comfortable on it, even if I don't love the pick. Larson definitely on something like an Ahri, which can both be proactive and be definitely lane dominant as well. I think those are definitely good picks, things like that. Things like the Azir, I think, are things that I would expect Larson to go to. I think Rogue's going to be in a much better spot with those two things than he would generally be, just sitting on something like a Talia, just trying to play a little bit more meta. So I think Rogue have kind of found their sweet spot. Mad definitely has to go back and start playing more to their strengths. So what happens in game number 5? Which one of these teams is qualifying for the World Championships automatically and pushing their spot into winners finals here? It is going to be Rogue that wins game number 5. So Rogue is able to take care of Mad Lions in the first round with a really, really interesting draft here, indexing very, very heavily into the early game, kind of trying to match Mad Lions in that respect as well. Both teams really playing to, this early game ideology where if one person, if one team gets a significant gold lead, it really feels like that team is just going to win the game. And shout out to Rogue because they did here. And they pull out the Caitlyn Lux. So you got to talk about this. The Caitlyn Lux comes out in the bottom lane as the counter pick to Lucian Nami. Now, we've known about this in solo queue for forever, right? Like, Caitlyn Lux is the counter pick to Lucian Nami. Lucian Nami isn't unbeatable. Caitlyn outranges Lucian by a considerable margin, and really there's just not a lot of ways for Lucian to generate a lead in this matchup. The big problem is that Lucian is significantly more useful in the late game, and honestly, Caitlyn really isn't all that good right now. She doesn't have a lot of damage overall, and so really she's just an early game. But if you can generate that early game lead, get some towers, be able to pressure out the enemy bot lane, really put them behind, you're actually in a good spot. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it did work really well in this game. Comp was able to play it in a way where he was never really in danger, and he never really gave Unforgiven the opportunity to get gold. Trimby, I think, played phenomenally on the Lux here. The Lux can really be an oppressive support, one of the most oppressive supports in the game to go into, and we really saw that in this lane matchup in particular, where it's like, what does the Nami actually do by the 5-minute mark when Lux is just throwing out her abilities? If she has mana, she's going to be able to dominate you in that lane, and that really, really became true in this game. So Trimby is actually going to get my player of the game. Not only did he play the early to mid game basically perfectly on the Lux, creating a situation where Caitlyn could do whatever she wanted, but the mid to late game was phenomenal. I mean, those bindings, those stuns are huge coming out from Lux, and then the ultimate's on basically like a 2-second cooldown. By the end of the game, she's outputting a significant amount of damage, basically making up for the fact that you have a very low damage mid laner here in Orianna. So very, very well played from Trimby, and honestly, he very much deserves player of the game. But you got to give a lot of credit to Comp as well, and the fact that they were just willing to pull out the Caitlyn Lux here. Even though that lane, I don't even think we've seen it once in any region at all in Summer Split. So definitely kind of fun to see that pop up here in the playoffs, and it definitely worked out. Not a perfect game, I would say, overall. Larson was very good here on the Ori. You know, he played fine into Niski. Niski, I think, was better in the early game, which he should have been, as the Sylas into the Ori in this matchup. But I think Larson did a really good job of maintaining control, not really giving up too much himself, and being able to, you know, just put the ball onto, you know, do the big wombo combo with the Jarvan, be able to put the ball onto Jarvan, have him Cataclysm in, and then Orianna Shockwave. Like that, it's a really deadly combo, and it definitely worked out here. He was doing a really good job with shielding in the late game as well, really helping out with some secondary damage. One of the things I was worried about was if Rogue was going to be able to close out this game with the amount of damage that they had here, because it's a little bit of a low damage comp, but Larson definitely made up for that with basically perfect play in the back half of the game, even if he wasn't all that useful at the beginning. But Malrang and Odo were fine. Malrang certainly made some mistakes early on in the game, and while the Caitlyn Lux counterpick was definitely working into the Unforgiven Kaiser Lucian Nami lane, Malrang was certainly giving some gold away to the Sylas, to the Lucian, really keeping Mad Lions in this game for a little bit. So definitely not perfect for Malrang, but he made up for it with some engages in the back half, and then Odo was fine on the Nard. But for Mad Lions, a tough way to go out. You really feel like you should have won this game from draft. I think Niski had significantly more prio in the mid lane here, and honestly won the mid lane matchup as that Sylas. Unforgiven and Kaiser, while they got zoned out, were doing a good job to take advantage of some mistakes that the jungle was making around objectives in the mid game. And Unforgiven was actually able to get a significant amount of gold in this lane, picking up kills on Malrang, picking up some kills here and there on Comp, on Trimby. But really, it was Elyoya that kind of started to run the game down towards the back half of this game. And we've seen this a couple times from him on Wukong in particular, where he just gets significantly over-aggressive when his laners are ahead, even if he himself doesn't have all the tools to be able to go in and survive in a fight. So he was going in, dying too quickly, and then it was really up to Niski to be able to win these games, and that's really not been his MO at all this season. He's really been the guy who's come in and really been able to unlock players like Elyoya, like Unforgiven, to be able to give them the keys to win the game, but unfortunately, they gave the keys to Niski in this one, and he just isn't the kind of player that was going to win it for them. So by the late game, when Sylas had to take over, he really couldn't. He couldn't match the same kind of pressure and definitely the same kind of range that this team was able to offer with safety from the Orianna, Caitlyn never really being able to be hit by anything, Lux just throwing out a billion abilities from behind enemy lines, and then a Shockwave coming in from Jarvan Cataclysm. And that's all ignoring the Gnarl, right? Like the Gnar flank, potentially. So Niski was never really able to do that. Unforgiven, like I said, was in a decent spot, just not a great one. It was really on the Sylas here to be able to win the game, and fortunately for Mad, they just couldn't pull through. But Elyoya is going to get my dud of the game. Definitely outplayed by Malrang. Even if Malrang wasn't perfect in this game, I think you could say Elyoya was definitely outplayed by Larson and Comp and Trimby in this game. That was certainly true as well. Really, he just didn't have all that much of an impact here on Game 5. But what does this mean for these two teams? Well, Mad Lions is now moving down to loser's bracket. They are relying on G2 to win their series against Misfits in order for them to auto-qualify for the World Championships, because if G2 wins, Misfits is the lower-seeded team going into loser's bracket, and they are automatically guaranteed top 4. Rogue, on the other hand, has now officially qualified for the World Championships with this win. They move into winners finals here in the LEC. That means they will play the winner of G2 and Misfits, and the winner of that will just be in the LEC finals. They put themselves in a really great spot, and a great win from them. I honestly didn't expect them to be so dominant in this series, but they were really good, and I think they captured a lot of Mad Lions in a good way. Wasn't perfect. Comp's gonna get my player of the series here. I think he was the most consistent player on Rogue. I don't think anybody on Rogue was perfect throughout the whole series. I will definitely say that, but overall, I thought Comp was definitely the one that was, you know, at least the most relevant in pretty much every single game, even some of their losses here. So even if this wasn't the most technically proficient series that I've seen, definitely not the same kind of dominance that we've seen from some of the other playoff series so far, Rogue is still going to be happy with the win. They're still going to be happy that they've clinched their ticket to the World Championships, and Mad Lions now has to rely on G2 to get the job done. But Rogue in a very good spot. They're going to be very happy with this win. And, you know, I can see them going a lot farther than people expect with how they played here. All right, that was our first of 3 series that we're going to be covering in this video. Our first of the upper bracket series, and it was a very, very fun first series between 2 rivals. Now we get a little bit of a different one, the other upper bracket series, this time between the number 1 seeded G2 Esports and the number 4 seeded Misfits Gaming. Definitely 2 teams that got here with different expectations, I will say at the very least. Everybody knew G2 was a good team. Everybody expected them to be in this position pretty much all year long. Obviously, our spring champions, a big reason why they were able to clinch the number 1 seed, even though they tied Mad Lions for the best record in summer. They were really, really good in the back half of the split. I think what a lot of other teams around them were really starting to falter and show a little bit more inconsistency. I feel like G2 really showed that they are a little bit of a cut above everybody, but you also have Misfits Gaming, who really at no point in the year really felt like a top tier team until they just didn't lose. Every other team I think had a lot of weird inconsistencies, whether it be Fnatic, Excel, you know, a bunch of teams I think had Vitality's another great example of a team that just had a ton of expectations, and their highs were probably better than Misfits, but Misfits never really had the lows of any of the other teams, and so they end up with the 4th seed and an upper bracket here, which is huge for them. This matchup was definitely something I was interested in my preview, but overall, I said that G2 certainly had the matchup advantage. I actually think this is one of Misfits' worst matchups in the league with how much they rely on their mid laner, and going up against Caps Jankos is just not all that great for them. But obviously, they've been overachieving and surprising people all year long. They can certainly do that in this series as well. So, was that able to happen? Let's go ahead and check it out by jumping into game number 1. And game number 1 was a G2 win. They start off the series incredibly strong with a really big stomp here, just off of the back of their players just being better. There's really no other way to put it. God, Caps is a good player. People were really mad that Caps wasn't in my All-Pro team, and I understand that, because it's definitely a weird statement for me to say that I think Caps is the best player in Europe and also not put him in my All-Pro team. But just because I think he's the best player in Europe doesn't mean I think he played the best this year. And that's kind of what All-Pro was for, in my opinion, who was the best this year. I thought Caps certainly had his ups and his downs, but over the last half of the season, he was super duper good. And man, does he start off the series with an absolute bang. He gets the Ahri. They go to the Nocturne Sejuani comp, which I actually am a huge fan of. I've talked about this on the channel quite a bit. I think Nocturne is like super slept on right now for the amount of versatility he gives the team. Just the pure darkness, like, is so strong right now. Not only does it shut down a lot of these super long range AD carries that are really taking over the meta, whether they be Sivir or Zeri or even Draven or something like that, Kalista. He really shuts down their auto attack potential without putting them in range of being counterattacked, but also he does a lot of damage, and the Fear is still really good. He has a spell shield. Just all of that is so strong that I think Nocturne's a good pick. You pair that up with the double assassin, almost the triple assassin comp here from G2 as they go Ahri in the mid lane, and boy, is Caps good at Ahri. It's actually disgusting how good he is at this champion. We've been talking about his Sylas all year long for good reason, because he's one of the best Sylases in the world, but Ahri is really not that far behind for him on the champion scale, because holy crap, what a game. He missed at most 1 or 2 charms this game. He was automatic. It looked like a point-and-click ability, and I've said that about Caps before in this season. When he gets on this champion, it's disgusting. He's easily player of the game. He went 12-0-12. I mean, come on. Like, what do you want? Like, other players in this game were really, really good. None were as dominant as Caps was, and he really just destroyed VTO in this laning phase. Was able to take over more than just, you know, the mid lane. Took over the bot lane, took over the jungle matchup, made top lane a problem as well with some really well-timed ganks. Honestly, just a phenomenal game from Caps. But you got to give a lot of credit to Jankos. I really think his jungle pathing was phenomenal in this game. Like I said, the Nocturne can be absolutely huge, and boy howdy did he completely outplay Zanzara in this one. Pretty much everybody on this team outplayed, but Jankos was really good. Give a lot of credit to Flocket and Targamas. Yasuo Senna is a really aggressive lane that I think can go well, and can also be a problem, especially into something like Sivir Lulu if you don't get that lead. But man, this game got so out of control that, like, it's not like Sivir could survive an Ahri gank or anything like that. Overall, just a really, really good game from G2. Even though they lost a little bit of a Baron steal, Yankos giving up, this random Baron steal halfway through. It was so out of control at that point, though, that they get the Baron and then all die, and it never mattered. Like, even when they got the Baron, it never was like, oh, is this good for them? It was always like, well, I mean, G2 just gave that away for no reason. Like, it never really felt like it mattered. So G2 was so much in control, mostly due to caps, that it was GG very, very early on. As for Misfits, really an awful game one. Like, this is one of the worst games they've had all year long without really any competition. They were just completely outplayed in this. Zanzara is my very clear dud of the game here. Not only did he get completely out-jungled by Yankos here, but, like, I don't know if there was a moment before 10 minutes where he wasn't on vision. Pretty awful vision control, not only by him, but by the team as a whole. And for that, like, good luck making plays as Vi when you are on vision 24/7. It's actually absurd how little pressure Zanzara had in this game. He's a very, very easy choice for dud of the game. I think another easy choice would have been VTO in the mid lane. Obviously, this team really thrives off of VTO being the hard carry in the early game for them. He and Zanzara have really linked up, I think, in recent weeks to become a really good duo. When both of them play like shit, there's really nothing that they can do to get back into the game. Obviously, Neon and Irrelevant are good late game players, but at the end of the day, if you don't even get to late game with an ounce of gold on you, it's not going to be possible. So VTO and Zanzara are really not good. Irrelevant also got completely run over in the top lane, but that one was just more of a team diff at that point. He lost to Broken Blade, but it's not like Broken Blade was playing super aggro on the Sedge or anything like that. It was just when you're playing a tank into a team that's up like 15k gold on you, you're going to look pretty bad. So unfortunately for Misfits, they just got completely outplayed. There really isn't much to say. Zanzara is dead of the game. VTO got completely slammed by Caps in lane. And then Caps he made Zanzara's life a living hell, Irrelevant's life a living hell, and Neon and Mersa couldn't even play the game in the back half. So overall, a really, really, really dominant game from G2. What does it mean overall for this team? Well, I mean, G2's got to feel great. This is a great matchup. They're the #1 team. They destroyed a bunch of teams, and Misfits really doesn't have the talent to keep up with them, and they really proved that in game one. If they can keep this going, I feel like G2 is going to be in a really good spot. As for Misfits, obviously one game isn't worth hitting the panic button yet, but this was not a very good game one. This is about as bad as you could start the series off with. A lot of the concerns that I think pretty much everyone had with Misfits came to light in game one, and this sets it up to be a pretty easy series for G2. So, can Misfits bounce back? Can they kind of get their head back on straight after what was a throttling in game one? Maybe, put themselves in a much better position here going into game number 2, and they can, as they are able to take game number 2 here. I did not think that was going to be possible after how much they got bopped in game number 1, but they did a really good job keeping their head on straight. They go to a little bit of a different draft, some of the same pieces, some different ones. They draft the Sejuani this time, but they actually flex it into the jungle here for Zanzara, something that he can be a lot more safe on, I would say, as opposed to the Vi pick, which they give to Yankos. You've got the Renekton to play through in the top lane, the Akali to be able to really unlock VTO, hopefully, and then you still have the late game of Sivir Lulu to be able to get there if you need to. And honestly, they just played the early game significantly better. Obviously, a much different comp here as G2, instead of the Yasuo Senna, goes for the Lucian Nami, and you would think that would actually give them more options in the bottom lane. However, Neon played this lane significantly better this time around. He obviously has more experience playing into the Lucian than he does into the Yasuo, and that was very clear here as he was able to get a pretty gigantic lead pretty early, mostly due to some great Zanzara pathing, but really, it was Zanzara who was able to take over a lot of this map. We talk about Zanzara, and now he's really unlocked a lot for this Misfits team ever since coming in about halfway through the split for Zlatan, and this game was a great example of that. Zlatan was very much a carry-style player that I don't think would have been willing to pick something like the Sejuani. But these are the types of picks that Zanzara really executes well on. Obviously, he's known for the Skarner, known for the Trundle, known for the Volley Bear, even the Poppy, things like that. I think Sejuani does fall into a similar category of a champion that isn't directly going to take over the game, but could very much be a huge influence on why the others are able to take over the game. And Zanzara really played it well. Not only was he not on vision the entire game, quite like he was in game number 1, but he was just able to make plays at the right times. I think he was able to set Neon up for a really, really solid early game. Mersa obviously doing a great job with that as well on the Lulu, but a really great job to make sure that Irrelevant had a really good game here on the Renekton. I think you could talk about Renekton kind of being, this up and down pick that I'm not super sold on, but we've seen a couple players really be able to take over on it, and Irrelevant had a very good game on the Renekton. Not only was he really dominant in that lane matchup against Ornn, which I talk about all the time, it's pretty even. It's really not like all this Renekton favor because he's early, pressure. I think Ornn absolutely can trade back here, so long as, especially as he plays safe. Once he gets to the point at about an item or item and a half, he is just as strong as Renekton, in my opinion. I think Irrelevant did a really good job being able to pressure in that early game around Broken Blade's aggressiveness, but Zanzra also did a great job of being able to take care of Jankos and making sure that Jankos didn't really have any pressure on this Vi. Now, the Vi pick, I think overall has been proven in playoffs to be pretty underwhelming. That, along with Lucian Nami, I think has generally just been underwhelming in the playoffs, and unfortunately for G2, they draft them both here. They draft both the Vi, the Lucian, the Nami. All of them are on here, and then they pull out the Twisted Fate. Now, I get Caps is a phenomenal Twisted Fate. Like, we've known this for years. His macro play on this champion should be great, and you would think in a meta that's really about mid lane roams and being able to make plays across the map, that TF would be a pretty high prio pick. Unfortunately, TF is just really giga garbage right now, and Caps pulls him out, and it does not work. VTO does a great job of being able to take advantage of that laning state, whether it is gaining a lot of pressure on Caps or just shoving him in and being able to be significantly more effective in whatever roam Caps ends up making, because VTO is just the better player, and he does it without teleport. He does it with Ignite, which is very impressive. So, really good game from VTO here, but Zanzra, Irrelevant really come out as the main carries here, in my opinion, or the main people really taking charge for Misfits, and then Neon and Mersa doing a really good job of maintaining that lead. As for G2, nobody on this team really played all that well. Like I said, Vi, Lucian, Nami feels like a bait, just because it feels like every single time I talk about these three champions, even separately, I talk about how it could have worked, but it didn't. Like, I get the point of Vi. Point and click CC on an ultimate is great for shutting down really hard to hit targets, but who are you really point and clicking here? Because Sivir can spell shield the ultimate, and you can't really just point and click on a Kali with Shroud up, so don't really know what Vi is here for. And then you've got the Lucian Nami that basically has to win early, and if your jungler's not really in a position to help you out, you're just not going to be able to do that in the 2v2. Neon gets that lead, and then all of a sudden the Lucian Nami is worthless. And so, really don't like that. Already talked about how the TF is just a bad pick, I think, overall in the meta right now. Not because of what he does, but just because of what he is. He's no damage, he's 0 damage, and his CC is nerfed, so he's just not all that useful right now, and really, I think this just led to a situation where no part of Misfits was winning. I really think the only decent lane matchup for them is Ornn into Renekton, but at that point, like, the Renekton just outplayed him, and so it was GG's for G2 at that point. So a very good win for Misfits to tie up the series here at 1-1. Definitely not bad at all, I would say, from a team that looked pretty out of it in game number 1 to come back and have a pretty dominant game number 2. I think this evens it up for both teams. While I still think the advantage goes to G2 just because, of course, they're going to drop a game. They always drop a random game in the series. Misfits have shown that they are able to at least have an idea to draft around this G2 team, and if G2 slips up with a couple more risky picks here, I definitely think this could be a lot more difficult than they anticipated. But is that going to be able to happen in this series? Is G2 going to be able to bounce back in a way that really regains a lot of the momentum in this series? Well, we're going to find out in game number 3. And game number 3 was a G2 win. They do take the 2-1 series lead, put themselves only one game away from moving to winners finals and following Rogue into the World Championship picture. Obviously, G2 already qualified, but, it'd be good for them to at least prove it here in playoffs to win their best of 5, and they really show up here in game number 3. Now, this was one of the closest games yet, probably the closest game yet, as, honestly, going into the late game, it really wasn't all that clear who had the advantage. Not only was G2's gold kind of spread around, Flacket had a lot of it, but Caps had a bit of it too, Jankos had a bit of it. Really, on the other side, they had to deal with a super-fed Sivir, and that was always going to be an issue for this comp, as in terms of backline access, you really don't have a lot of easy backline access. You have the Wukong that can go in, but really Neon should never be in a position to get hit by that. Same with anything Sivir wants to put out, as she's always going to be on the front line. And you've got Kalista and Azir, who don't really have an easy way to get to the Sivir in the backline, and her ricochets really are going to be doing a million damage. Add on to that, I really think, despite the score, Zanzra played a really good game here on the Skarner, and things were definitely interesting going into the last 2 team fights, but Caps was really able to take over in terms of damage. It really was the Azir versus the Sivir in terms of damage output in these final fights, and Caps just played it so beautifully and so perfectly that G2 was able to come out with some teamfight wins and take the game. Caps clearly going to be my player of the game in this one. Again, a really great game 3 from him. He comes out on a carry champion in Azir where, he really needs to get to that late game, and he's really kind of the focal point of G2 once you get to that point. Obviously, Flacket has a lot of gold on the Kalista, but it's not as free as you would think. Kalista not only has some range issues, but also just late game, I think she has some survivability issues, and Targamas really was going to have to work to make sure that Flacket was in a good spot. And honestly, against a Charm, against a Zanzara on Skarner, even a Renekton, something that can go in and really upset the balance of where that Kalista wants to be, it was really difficult for her to actively get all the damage off that she wanted to, but Caps did a really good job of being that primary damage source and really dominated the positioning in the late fights. Honestly, there was a really phenomenal exchange by both Caps and Zanzara towards the back half of this game, where Zanzara fakes Skarner ult, gets Caps to basically full decommit to the fight while Neon is basically free hitting. And then Caps does a great job of repositioning himself, only for Zanzara to then actually ult him and bring him back in, only for Caps to get back out and then reposition and really put himself in a good part for that fight. Like, honestly, like, those two were really having a phenomenal 1v1 in this game, and it was really fun to watch, but Caps does come out on top. You got to give a little bit of credit to Flacket. He really did a good job in the mid game being able to translate a lot of the objective fights into kills for himself. Really picking up a lot of gold on the Renekton, on the Skarner, on the Braum, things like that. He was able to pick up a significant amount of gold and put himself in a position where he was just incredibly fed. You see his score at the end of the game, 13-1 and 14. That's a great score. It doesn't quite indicate his role on the team because I don't think he was quite the carry this game, but still a very good game from Flacket, and you got to give a lot of credit to Targamas in that respect as well. Like I said, Kalista often going to be in trouble against this comp. Targamas has to be a very good frontline champion to be able to help Flacket stay out and be able to peel for him when he needs it. Yankos, Broken Blade were fine. I will say Yankos a little bit outplayed, especially with how Zanzara was doing in the back half of this game. But overall, Caps, phenomenal game from him. He is another, I mean, he just keeps proving why he's the best player in the LEC over and over again. Another phenomenal endgame from him. As for Misfits, tough loss here. You definitely had a shot. It wasn't quite as easy as some of their other games would have been, right? Like, Neon was online and he had gold and Zanzara was playing well, but nobody else on the team was really all that much of an impact. You had VTO on the Ahri, and really he just was a charm by the end of the game. He wasn't really doing enough damage to really be considered an assassin, especially considering if he did not hit the charm on Kalista, there really was no chance he was actually killing anybody, and even if he did, they still had the Tahm Kench to be able to just eat Kalista and protect her in that regard. Then you also had the Renekton in the top lane, which just wasn't all that relevant. Not to be, you know, punny here with irrelevant, but he's going to get my dud of the game here on the Renekton. Just wasn't all that important in this game. There were times where I really feel like a well-timed Renekton, you know, engage here could have been a huge problem, and obviously, if he had been more of a nuisance to someone like Caps in this game, I think it could have been a pretty big issue for G2, but he was just never really that much of a problem. In fact, he was kind of just not a factor at any point. But you do got to give credit where credit is due, and I think Zanzara and Neon really showed up in this game and did give Misfits a chance to actually win it. Not that it was a great chance, but, you know, Zanzara with some great plays. I already detailed that awesome late game team fight. And honestly, just his Skarner plays in general. Yeah, he died a lot, but honestly, oftentimes he died creating an advantage for Neon and really helping him get into a position where he could carry the game. And Neon really could carry the game. He just didn't have enough time. Caps outplayed him in the back half of the game, and unfortunately that meant G2 pick up the win. But a lot of credit to Neon and a lot of credit to Zanzara for keeping this game close for Misfits. But that was game number 3. It's now 2-1 G2. Definitely in a position now. Obviously, it's win or go home for Misfits, so yeah, they need a win here. But even outside of that, a position where they really need a win to recollect their mental. They played well in that game, but honestly, a lot of their superstars, or a lot of the players that I think really stood out for them in the regular season, really haven't showed up in the series so far, namingly VTO and Mursa, who just quite haven't been the players that, you know, you wanted them to be so far in the series. Can they pull that around, and can they show up in game number 4? It's win or go home for Misfits, and the winner is G2. They are able to close out the series here in 4 games. Honestly, just a really good game from G2, and it's very similar, in my opinion, to their game 1 win. This was a lot more of a stomp, a lot more of a just, I want to say a draft diff, but honestly, it was an execution diff. We've seen drafts like this go completely under the radar and really be really worthless in the LPL especially, and I think G2 executed on it in a way where they were just unkillable at points in the game. Obviously, you draft the Renekton and then flex it into the mid lane, drafting the Gwen for Broken Blade, giving Caps the Renekton, something he's obviously played a little bit of in the past, and Assassin Renekton came out to play today. A very interesting build from Caps that I really haven't seen on Renekton, but honestly, I really love it. Like, Assassin Renekton is such an interesting pick, and he really did a ton in this game. He's going to get my player of the game again here, as he was really dominant. He really kept VTO from doing anything on the Corki, and Corki's obviously a pick I'm very down on in the meta right now, but still, he did a really good job of being able to neutralize that. Yankos had the entire map under his thumb, whether it be I don't know, just broken blade in the top lane, being able to make plays whenever he wanted, and not really have to worry about any counter engages, or Flacken and Targamas just dominating the Zeri Sivir handshake. It was just pretty much over at minute, 10 for Misfits, unfortunately, and G2 looked like the better team in the series by a lot. Caps was awesome on the Renekton. You gotta give a big shout out here to Flacken and Targamas. I thought, while they weren't dominant in the series, they really were consistently good, and I thought Neon really came to play today, and fortunately Mursa didn't quite back him up on that, but Flacken and Targamas I thought did a really good job, and then Yankos, while he didn't have the best of series, had a really good game 4 here, so overall, just a good game from G2. Not really much to talk about outside of the Renekton in the mid lane. That was really the focal point for a lot of what G2 wanted to do, and it was really the focal point of the storyline of the game. But for Misfits, tough loss. Obviously, you're not out of the playoffs by any means just yet. You move down to loser's bracket with this loss because you are the lower seed out of you and Mad Lions. You are going to have to play the winner of Fnatic and Excel, where Mad gets another game to prepare against Misfits and the winner of that game. So, a lot to think about here. Misfits definitely has to get their mojo back a little bit quickly, but done of the game here is going to go to VTO, and honestly, what a pretty poor series from VTO. This is someone who Misfits really relies on to be a carry threat for this team, or else they just don't really have all that much of a PowerPoint on the map, and he just wasn't all that good in this series. Caps severely outplayed him basically in all 4 games, really with the exception of game 2 where VTO was fine, but he tries to pull out the Corki, and really this is just a super underpowered pick. In the meta right now, Corki does almost no damage, especially in comparison to a lot of his contemporaries. I think he's even lower damage than someone like a Talia, and so really just not the ideal matchup here for VTO, but at the end of the day, he obviously felt comfortable on it. You flex the Sedge back into the jungle, something Zanzara has been good at. You go with an Ornn for weak side top lane, and you try to get Neon back on someone he can carry on. But you put him with the Amumu, and unfortunately, the Amumu is a feast or famine pick, and when you're losing, the Amumu looks awful. So unfortunately, Corki Amumu just wasn't going to work out this game. So VTO Mursa, not all that good in this series, and certainly a problem in this game. Their season is not nearly over, but they definitely are going to have to get some of their mojo back, because they just were simply outclassed in this series by G2. As for G2, they've got to be happy. Not only did they lock in a world slot in regular split, but now they've basically locked in a top 3 seed at the absolute worst, because even if they don't win another another split, I should say, another series in the regular season, at worst, they're going to be the 3rd seed coming out of the LEC, so that's got to be pretty good for them. Obviously, they're in winners finals. They're in a really good spot. They play Rogue, which we will detail towards the back of this episode, but I honestly really think that G2 is on a little bit of a different level in terms of teams in the playoffs here, and I think this series was just a little bit of an example of that. There really is no shock as to who my player of the series is. It's Caps. He won player of the game all 3 of their wins. It really shouldn't be that much of a surprise to see that I think Caps was player of the series. He is really showing up. And if you get this Caps all playoff long, it should be a complete breeze to another LEC title for G2 Esports. All right, now we've done 2 of the 3 series we'll be covering today. Both of the upper bracket series are decided. We know who's in winners finals. Now it's time to decide who is going to be moving on and who will be the first team officially eliminated from the playoffs here in our losers bracket round 1 matchup here between the 5 and the 6 seed, the 5-seeded Fnatic and the 6-seeded Excel team. Now both of these teams probably felt like they should have been much higher in the standings throughout most of this year, but both went through large stretches where they just couldn't buy a win, even when it felt like they were a good team. Now, Fnatic obviously really never a team that's had to face this much adversity early on in the split. They've never been a team that has been as low as the 5 seed as far as I'm concerned. This is the worst regular season Fnatic has ever had, and so really, they're in a position of unknown, especially with the roster that everybody felt was going to be very strong. And then you have Excel, who really put together a phenomenal split in spring and really looked like they had it together towards the beginning of summer, picking up some pretty huge wins here and there, but they just could not keep the consistency. Towards the back half of the year, weeks 6 and 7, they went 0-4 through those weeks, and just because they had a good week in the final week, they're actually in here. There was a very good chance that Excel was the team on the outside looking in. Fortunately, they won the tiebreaker against Vitality to put themselves in this spot, but it's a very intriguing matchup between 2 teams that really feel more talented than the 5 and 6 seed matchup should be. So it was very exciting, and I was very excited to see what exactly would happen in this series. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I could see this going either way. Both of these teams have really over and underperformed at multiple points throughout the season. It's really going to be about which team shows up today. And starting off in game number 1, the team that showed up in that game was Excel, as they take the first game here to go up 1-0 in the series. And it was a pretty strong endgame from them. Pretty decent draft from both sides here. Really can't complain all that much. Excel going back to the Nyla, a pick that they pulled out a couple of times here in the regular season. Patrick clearly feels like this is something that he can actively succeed on. We have certainly not seen that in the regular season so far. I've talked about this in pretty much every region that has had Nyla experimented in so far. She really just hasn't felt all that good or looked all that good at any point. Her damage just seems to be a little bit underwhelming for how risky her gameplay style ends up being. But obviously pairing her up with Yuumi is certain to help her a considerable amount. You've also got a lot of CC on this team with the Sejuani, with the Lissandra. So there are a lot of ways to really accelerate that. And man, Patrick made Nyla look completely overpowered in this game. When she got going, she was impossible to stop. Patrick was phenomenal. He's going to get the player of the game here in game number 1. Patrick, at times, looks like the best AD carry in the LEC, and it's really not all that close when he's playing at his absolute best, and this game was certainly one of those games where he was just completely taking over the game, whether it be outplaying the Lucian Nami early game lane here that Fnatic ends up going for in an effort to really just snowball the game out of control, or in the late game, whether it be Patrick absolutely styling on Gwen in a 1v1 melee range matchup against a fighter with more HP, and it was really just a phenomenal outplay by Patrick, who just played it genuinely perfectly, and he really deserved everything he got this game. He very much deserves the player of the game, and a wonderful start to the series for Patrick. But Mickey back on the Yuumi. We'll talk about this throughout the series. This is an unlock key for Excel. This has really been the pick that they've gone to over and over again and has been the most consistent for them. If there is any pick in any role for them that has been the pick that when they get it, they typically win, it has been the Yuumi. And it really didn't seem like Fnatic was all that pressed by it, giving it up pretty early on in this draft. And, we'll see throughout the series how they adapt to that. But Mickey getting that Yuumi has certainly been a positive. He's been kind of inty on other champions throughout the split, and his Yuumi here has been a little bit safer. He allows him to just kind of sit on Patrick and let him do all the heavy lifting, and Patrick, as we know, will take advantage of that. So very, very well done from them. Not really anybody else on Excel being all that phenomenal. They make some pretty interesting decisions in this game. I actually think Nukeduck played the back end of this game pretty okay, although the beginning part of it wasn't all that perfect from him. Marcoon and Finn were fine, just kind of more supportive players, not people to really change the outcome of the game. Definitely a bold call from Excel, and we will see a couple of that from them throughout this series, as they go ahead and trade Ocean Soul for Baron throughout this game, and that's a very bold call for Excel to make, but they end up taking the soul, and they end up being able to win the fight and win the push in the late game, which is very, very risky, but they were able to pull it off in what was a pretty close game here, mostly due, again, to Patrick just being able to style in that team fight and doing the most damage and really being able to take over. But for Fnatic, kind of an okay game 1. Certainly not something I'm going to hit the panic button on. This was a close game that honestly you were in. You just didn't have the super carry in this game, which unfortunately was the Nyla. A couple things I'd be a little bit worried about. The solo lanes were a little bit outclassed in this game. Wonder not so much by Finn, but certainly in the late game, like I said, just got outplayed by Patrick. And certainly had some weird plays in laning phase as well on the Gwen. So Wonder's going to get my dud of the game here in game 1, although it's not like the most duddiest dud of the game that I've given out. Obviously, nobody on Fnatic really played all that awful. Wonder just made a little bit more of a faux pas than I think some of the other players, but Humanoid I definitely think got a little bit outplayed in this game as well. Nukeduck certainly had his number in the back half of this game, but also Lissandra should be able to do that to Ahri. You point and click on Ahri to stun her, and then ideally you have Nyla go in and completely blow her up. That takes out a ton of Fnatic's damage, and honestly Humanoid was just never really in a position to dodge that. I guess he never really felt like he had to, but it really came back to bite them and bite him specifically at points. Upset had gold, but it really was never going to be enough to keep up. And Razork was fine in this game. I don't really think he did anything all that wrong. In fact, in the early game, I thought he had some decent pressure being able to get Upset some gold. But overall, Fnatic just couldn't quite hang in with Excel in game number 1 here. But what does that mean for the rest of the series? Well, Excel with a really, really strong start. We've seen this from Excel, though. Obviously, they're not the most consistent team in the world. They're going to have to hang on to that lead. Obviously, Nyla looking great and Patrick looking phenomenal here. I expect that to be something that Fnatic at least considers. Obviously, I don't think Nyla is strong enough to give like an early ban to unless you really feel like you can't beat it, but you know, there are picks in the game that I think do play into Nyla relatively well. But I do think you have to ban out the Yuumi. The Yuumi is a pick that I think Excel has shown that they become a significantly better team with than without. So definitely something to keep in mind there. As for Excel, just kind of keep going with this. If you can get your bot lane in a position to win, they often will win you the game. We've seen that. That has been Excel's win condition throughout the entire season. So can they do that as we move into game number 2? Can they continue on this big momentum shift with their bot lane really outplaying Fnatic? They can, as they are able to take game number 2 here with a very, 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 very intriguing draft. Really, really excited to see this come out. Obviously, a couple of picks and a couple of things that I want to point out. One, well, they triple banned out 80 carries and then gave him Sivir. Not exactly sure I'm all that into that. And then they also left up the Yuumi. Also really not sure I'm all that into that. I'm really not sure about that, but really left up some really interesting picks here from Excel. The Aatrox and the Renekton are gone. Wonder goes with the Shyvana, trying to be a little bit more aggressive in that tank style in the top lane. Still be safe, but still be aggressive. And Finn counters with the Kled. Now, Kled is something we actually have seen a little bit so far in Summer Split, but really nothing consistent has come out of it. He pulls it out here, and man, it looked really good. Like, the Kled honestly was a really big problem for Fnatic. The engaged potential of Kled's Sivir is actually nuts. And then the fact that you can just kind of throw a Twisted Fate onto the backline there to kind of corner you in. You have a Sejuani running at you at full speed, trying to ult. Like, that's terrifying, and it really makes it very difficult for this front line to actually achieve anything, and Excel plays it super duper duper well. Big shout out to this bot lane. Again, like I said, a lot was thrown at this bot lane. You had 3 AD bans, and yet Patrick still comes away with, in my opinion, the strongest AD carry in the meta right now in Sivir. And somehow that's possible. And then also Mickey gets to play Yuumi. This is probably the best lane you can have, maybe with the exception of Yuumi Zeri. But even then, I think Sivir has a little bit more of a consistent late game. Just like, wow. Like, it's just insane that this was, like, this is a draft nightmare for Fnatic, in my opinion. Nukeduck does get put onto something like the Twisted Fate, but he wasn't ever targeted in this draft. There were no mid laners taken off the board. He chose to go into that. You have the Sedge flexed into the jungle here with the Kled going into the top lane, taking away even more options for Fnatic to actually go to a top laner in this game, putting Wonder on something that's pretty far down his totem pole in Sejuani, or the Shyvana rather. And honestly, it's just it's a draft gap from Excel. I don't usually talk about draft gap too big, but this is, I mean, this is egregious from Fnatic to allow this to happen. It's not the worst, like, actual draft in the world, but how do you spend, like, this is just a gross mismanagement of your bans and resources in this game, in my opinion. But Excel really takes advantage of a lot of the things in this game. Nukeduck does a really good job of being able to take over the map on TF. I talked earlier today, I think, or yesterday, I can't remember, about how TF is really just not all that good right now. Like, he's fine as a pick, but his damage is just so ridiculously low that what's even the point? Like, what's even the point of him right now when Talia just does more damage and arguably has more of a pick potential right now? I don't really know, but alright, you still went to it and it worked fine. Like, the combination of Kled, Sivir ult into Twisted Fate kind of hitting the backline with Gold Card into Sejuani just running at them was a really, really dangerous combo that really Fnatic had no answer to. But you gotta give a big shout out to this bot lane. Like I said, the Sivir taken here for Patrick. He does so much damage in the back half of this game, really the big damage threat, and he was player of the game in terms of damage. But honestly, can you give player of the game to anybody other than Mickey on this Yuumi? You cannot allow Mickey to get Yuumi anymore. You just can't. This Excel team is a completely different beast when they have Yuumi versus when they don't. Mickey is so predictable and so dangerous when he's not on a champion that can literally sit on the AD carry and not be out of position, essentially. And unfortunately for Fnatic, like, Mickey's just gonna go back to this first pick every single time if you leave it open. So force him to play something else. Maybe he can start getting into those situations where he's going to be able to get picked off and get caught, like he quite frankly has been on every other champion all split long. So Mickey goes back to the Yuumi and looks great on it and really enables the entire Excel team. So good for him. And like I said, the Kled pick was honestly genius. It really, really showed up in this game. Not only was the damage really good to make the laning phase against the Shyvana kind of a nightmare for the Shiv, but Kled late game was so impactful with that ultimate. And just being able to play super aggressive here, double frontlining with the Sejuani, giving so much time and credence for Twisted Fate to be able to lock down a target and then Patrick just to be able to free fire in the backline. You had Yuumi jumping around from front line to backline, being able to heal whoever really needed it at the moment. It was just honestly a dominant game from Excel. It really wasn't all that close at any point, and I think the draft really had a lot to do with that. So good for Excel. They were able to pull it off. As for Fnatic, frustrated. I'm frustrated because this team is good. They are, I promise, but they just can't draft. Like, this is so not smart. Like, triple banning AD is, first of all, in this meta, not a good idea. There are way too many AD carries that are viable and strong in the meta. Second off, you don't ban Sivir when you're triple banning AD. Like, what is the point? I just don't understand. So Patrick gets Sivir, in my opinion, the best AD carry in the meta, with the best support in the meta, and then you get a comp that really enables Sivir to pretty much the utmost extreme, while you are sitting there matching with Poppy, Lucian, Nami in the first rotation. I just simply don't understand what is going on here from Fnatic. Poppy's a fine pick, and Razork was fine in this game, if a little bit overextended at points, but Lucian Nami was never going to hold their own against Sivir Yuumi, because if that lane goes anything but super in favor of Lucian Nami, which it has to with Poppy, that, you know, like, Poppy has to invest heavily into that lane because Twisted Fate's going to be there as well. Like, if it goes any way other than Lucian Nami dominating it, Sivir's just simply going to be way stronger in the late game. Not only does she have way more range, she has self-heal, she has a Yuumi on top of her, and she has more damage. So, okay, great. And then you have the Shyvana in the top lane, which I think can work as a little bit of this, like, hybrid, tank, a little bit of damage style that I think, especially when all of the other top laners were banned out, Shyvana's not really all that awful of a pick here, but you get a counterpicked with Kled, and the Kled really took over the map. Obviously, it's not your fault that you weren't anticipating Finn going Kled here, but I don't know, Shyvana's not the safest top laner in the world or anything like that. And then you gotta talk about Humanoid, who was just bad in this game. He's gonna get my dud of the game. He had some moments on Sylas where he was pretty decent in terms of the damage output he was putting out, but at the same time, he never once stole Twisted Fate's ultimate, which is like the reason you pick Sylas into TF. I just don't understand. It feels like Humanoid has completely turned his brain off. He has been so not good over the past, like, 4 months, and I just don't know what happened to him. I definitely think he's still a good player. He has the mechanics to make it work, but his mental decisions have been so poor, and just his reactions and his game knowledge has felt really bad recently. Hopefully he can turn that around. We know he can be a good player. This is a multiple-time Worlds participant, but man, like, he's not been good this year, and he really was not good in this game, and so he's gonna get my dud of the game. But overall, a rough game for Fnatic, like, a rough one just in general. Again, you got draft gapped pretty hard. The Lucian Nami was never going to be viable. Razork was going to have to put in a ton of work to even make this game playable for Fnatic, and unfortunately for him, the Sejuani to Twisted Fate combo was just a little bit too much macro pressure for just Razork to have to deal with, and then Humanoid played it really bad. So Fnatic lost, and it was a pretty dominant loss. As for Excel, if Fnatic's going to draft like this and give you pretty much everything you want and then some, you're going to win the series in 3, and it's not going to be all that close. So really good start for Excel. All they have to do is really keep this momentum, because right now they've got their foot on the gas and they're really driving very close to the finish line. So as long as they can finish strong, they should be able to close out the series. But obviously, it's not over until it's over. A lot of teams have gotten up into a 2-0 position in this playoffs in order to be reverse swept. So, at the end. So there's a lot that can still happen. Obviously, we just saw TES JD Gaming, so I'm not going to count anybody out until it's over, but Fnatic certainly has to change a lot, and it's got to start here in game number 3. So can they turn their fortunes around? Can Fnatic pick up a very important win now in game number 3? They can. They do pick up an all-important win here in game 3, keeping their season alive here, and oh boy, this was Excel's game to lose, and they lost it, so can a huge win for Fnatic here in game 3 in order to keep their season alive. And as much as I can sit here and praise them, this was Excel's game to lose, and somehow they lost it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Fnatic didn't play well, but man, Excel had this one in the bag in the back half of this game. Not only did they throw like 5 different times, but the most egregious, obviously, was them winning a fight in the back half of this game, and instead of getting the free Elder Dragon, the actual free Elder Dragon, they tried to end the game, didn't have the time, got completely aced, and then the game was over. It was unbelievable, and that decision is going to haunt this Excel team if they do not come back to win this series, because this game was in their hands. Like, it was it was in their hands to win, and they unfortunately couldn't get it done. But what did Fnatic do right in this game? Well, I gotta give a ton of credit to Razork here. Razork really showed up on the Poppy here and was creating a lot of advantages for this Fnatic team in the early game, whether it be mostly in the bot lane as they go to the Twitch Yuumi, which I do feel like is a relatively underutilized bot lane combo. If you can get the Yuumi, obviously you love getting the Sivir, you love getting the Zeri, but Twitch is a very, very good lane partner with the Yuumi and can really take advantage of a lot of the weaknesses that Sivir and Zeri have, as his range in the late game, obviously with ultimate on, is absolutely nuts. But overall, really, really good game from Razork to be able to get Upset online on the Twitch, even with a few moments where Upset was kind of running it at points. And then obviously you take away the Yuumi from Excel and you pick it yourself. And this is what I've been telling them to do. Excel is a completely different team without Yuumi, especially in the late game team fights. And getting Mickey off of that pick is absolutely ginormous. And putting Hilly on it, I also think is great. It really limits a lot of the mistakes that Hilly can make. And we know that Hilly isn't exactly mistake-proof throughout the split. So Razork investing a lot into that bot lane, but also doing a good amount to make sure that Humanoid is in a pretty decent spot here. It's a good matchup, I would say, overall for Humanoid into the Nocturne as the Sylas, but not a perfect matchup. Definitely something where the Nocturne can outplay a lot of what Sylas wants to do, because Sylas's pressure, while being great in lane, isn't exactly quite as efficient out of lane, because Nocturne can get a lot of places very quickly with ultimate. So a lot of really interesting plays being able to be made in this game, but overall, both bot lanes really get a lot of gold. Upset really getting a lot on the Twitch. Patrick able to get a lot on the Sivir. Obviously, Excel has really run through their bot lane in a lot of these games, but a big advantage for Excel actually in the early to mid game here is a lot of the gold that went on to Finn in the top lane, who really did win that top lane matchup pretty hard here against Wunder. Obviously, Kennen into Gragas isn't exactly the most Gragas favored matchup in the world, but you know, Wunder's a really good Gragas player, probably the best Gragas top player or at least one of them in the world. And Finn on the Kennen hasn't really been the most consistent pick for him all year long, but he really was very good in laning phase, and he was actually able to get some really clutch ultimates off towards the mid game to really set himself up to be a big force in the late game. And towards the back half of the game, things were going well. You had the Kennen ult flanking, you had Nocturne turning off the lights so that Twitch had really no way to target anybody. Honestly, Nocturne's a phenomenal counter to Twitch, because remember, Twitch with ultimate on, like, has to get super close to be able to auto-attack anybody, and that's a problem for him. And so Nocturne does a really great job there. And then Sivir was able to do a ton of damage on the backline. Excel was honestly in a pretty decent spot, even being down gold, because Razork, Humanoid, Upset had a considerable amount. Even Hilly had some good amount of gold. But again, that one decision, that one call to try and end instead of going for the free Elder Dragon is going to haunt Excel as they try to end. They get aced, and the game is over in favor of Fnatic, and we go to a game 4. Very, very rough for them. Like I said, I think Fnatic did play well, but honestly, Excel had this game in the bag and threw it away. My player of the game is still going to go to Razork in the jungle. He was really, really great in the early game, setting up his bot lane, making sure that his team had gold. It just wasn't all smooth sailing towards the back half of this game, mostly because Wunder could not win in the top lane, and then also Patrick was just playing really well towards the back half of this game, even if he did have some misposition mistakes. But for Excel, it wasn't all perfect either. Not only was that call wrong, I feel like Nukeduck played a pretty poor game here on the Nocturne, and honestly, Mickey played a pretty poor game here on the Lulu. I think in certain scenarios, there really is no excuse for Patrick dying in some of these fights that he did end up dying in. Mickey should have been consistently on his AD carry, but I think he was more concerned with the Kennen on the front line, which was definitely a little bit of a concern, and definitely not what you want to see out of your support. He also was just way too far forward in a lot of bot lane exchanges, allowing Razork to be able to make plays on him in situations where it really just shouldn't have been possible. And so Mickey's going to get my dud of the game here. You finally take him off the safety blanket that is the Yuumi pick. You put him on something like Lulu, which is still very safe, but he doesn't quite perform under that same, level, and he's actually going to get my dud of the game. This is definitely a strategy I would expect Fnatic to go back to, because Mickey has looked completely susceptible without that pick all split long. And honestly, if he was a little bit more consistent in the early game, if Patrick was in a better position in some of these late game team fights, this really could have been even easier a win for Excel to be walking away with a 3-0. But as it stands now, Fnatic is able to take game number 3. Now, what does this mean for the series? Well, it means Fnatic is still alive. It certainly doesn't mean that the momentum has shifted. Like I said, they basically walked out of game 3 with an accidental win. It means that Excel very, very well could just be the better team and be able to finish this in 4. But Fnatic is starting to get their plot armor coming in here, the main character buff that Fnatic team seems to get in the playoffs every single year. Kind of coming back here from a game 3 that they should have lost. you know, Wonder was really bad in the early game and then hit a really crucial ultimate in the late game to win the game. Like this crazy storyline turnaround. The script has been written. I can definitely see a world in which the script calls for a Fnatic reverse sweep. So both teams definitely have to be going into this one with a win or go home mindset. Excel really does not want to go to a game 5 with Fnatic if they win 2 in a row. Fnatic certainly can't lose this or else they're out. So both teams really in a position that they feel like they have to win this game number 4. And game number 4 goes to Fnatic. And they are able to tie up the series 2-2. And that's about as climactic as it could possibly get. And oh my god, the script writers have really figured out exactly what the crowd wants to see here as not only was this a Fnatic win, but who better to get the player of the game and to really show up in this game than Humanoid in the mid lane, who's going to get my player of the game on the Sylas. Obviously, I've been pretty critical of Humanoid throughout the year, especially on this Sylas pick, where it really feels like he takes laning phase a little bit too seriously and too aggressively to the point where he's very susceptible to map pressure and map ganks, especially going in to something like an Ahri, which can just hit one charm and then all of a sudden the Wukong can get on you and you're dead. Or theoretically, the Ahri can leave the lane and make plays around the map and set his team up in a bad situation because he's not willing to abandon that lane lead. But Huma finally had a game where it really felt like he was starting to adapt to what the meta really was right now, which is more playing with your team and more being, like, not the focus of everything in the game. It really felt like Huma was struggling with that all year long, and Fnatic, you know, for their part, never really helped him adapt to that. But it certainly worked a lot better in this game. I think he really outplayed Nukeduck to a considerable margin, in which we will get to that. And, I think it was honestly a big reason that Fnatic was so comfortably able to win in the late game here, even though the game was kind of close, was that Humanoid was really able to take over these team fights, not really able to be killed, and was honestly doing a considerable amount of damage. Like, this is the problem when Sylas gets really far ahead, and Humanoid is definitely a good enough player to be able to take advantage of that in the late game. But it wasn't just about Humanoid, even though he was my player of the game here for game number 4. You gotta give a lot of credit to Razork here on the Trundle. He was everywhere on this map, whether it be top lane, making sure the Renekton was decently positioned to be able to go into the Sejuani. Certainly wasn't a perfect game from Wonder, but it was alright enough. Mid lane, obviously, to help Humanoid generate that lead and get that Sylas in a position where he could be really strong. Or bot lane to make sure that Lucianami was not going to get game 1'd again by Nyla Yuumi, which, by the way, they gave up Nyla Yuumi again, which, if you want to give it up, fine. You better beat it. You better not lose to it, or else you look like morons. And luckily for Fnatic, they were able to beat it because Humanoid really stepped up in this game. But I really think a lot of the difference here was just vision control. This was one of the better vision control games that I've seen from Hylissang and from Razork in quite a while. Both of them have been very good at making sure that their teams do have vision. But I really think that, like, this was a little bit different. This was kind of a much more complete game, in the same way that I was making fun of Zanzara in game 1 of the G2 Misfits series for constantly being on vision. It really felt like the entire Excel team was on vision, and that made it a lot easier to track them all. So overall, a good game from Fnatic, mostly Humanoid and Razork, but Upset Hylissang definitely did their part. Definitely some weird plays from Wonder on the Renekton, but it's Renekton. Like, he's going to have some moments where he goes in and just dies, or has some moments where he gets ganked in the top lane and really can't survive. It's also Wonder. He does both of those things very well in that same boat, but at the same time, he was still fine. The stuns were important, and honestly, he was a great shield for Excel to focus on in the late game of the team fight, so that Sylas wasn't the #1 priority frontline target for Excel. But in the end, great job from Fnatic to execute on what they needed to execute on. As for Excel, not a good game. Honestly, it's really, really frustrating to watch if you're an Excel fan, because not only did Nukeduck just get outplayed by Humanoid, and that's going to happen, like, it's assassin versus an assassin matchup here. Sylas is just a little bit more versatile, and obviously I think that matchup is a little bit Sylas favored, but you know, you could still win that as Ahri. It's just not going to be all that easy. So Nukeduck losing, it's fine. It's still Humanoid. Humanoid's still a good player. Marcoon losing in the jungle, whatever. It happens. Razork's having a really good series here. Marcoon wasn't perfect all year long. He gets in the Wukong, and he wasn't even all that bad. He just wasn't perfect. But I can't really excuse what Mickey did this series, in which it's just really unexplainable. Like, Patrick is the carry of this comp. There's really no explanation for why you would be on anybody else. But it felt like every crucial 5v5 team fight, Yuumi is on Ahri, or Yumi's on Sejuani, and then Nyla just can't go in, because Nyla can't really survive without Yuumi there, and Mickey's, I imagine Patrick's in call just screaming, like, Yuumi, on me, like, what are you doing? Are you losing your mind? And no matter what happened, Mickey would refuse to go on the Nilo. And we already saw in game 1, if Yuumi just sits on Nilo, the game is over. Like, the game is genuinely over. There's not a lot that they actually can do about that. Now, obviously, Fnatic has a much better comp to deal with it this game. I think the Sylas is actually pretty good into Nyla in general, but still, like, what are you thinking if you're Mickey? He's going to get the dud of the game because what a complete lapse of judgment. This is just unacceptable. Like, I can't even begin to explain what he could have been thinking, being like, I need to be on the Ahri every team fight instead of the Nyla. I can't even begin to tell you the thought process behind that, but it certainly did not work. Patrick was left completely out to dry in this game, and Excel lost because of it. I'm not saying they're guaranteed to have won if Mickey would have played this better, but they certainly would have been in a much better spot. And it's not like Patrick didn't have gold in this game. He certainly could have been in a position to be able to win this game for Excel, but Mickey never really gave him the opportunity, and that is just frustrating. Mickey has really been bad this year. Like, I talked about how Mickey was really the one that unlocked a lot of what this Excel team was doing. Honestly, over the course of, like, the last 5 weeks of the summer split, plus this playoff series, this team has been worse for having Mickey X on the team. He's not even a top 5 support in the region right now, and he's really not all that close. In my opinion, he was the worst support in the league in summer split, and I'm not saying that that would continue on to next year, but man, like, I don't know what's happening to him. Like, his brain is just completely gone. And it was a really, really bad game from him. Like I said, it wasn't just him. Nukeduck didn't have a great game on Ahri. He was fine, but it wasn't all that great. Marcoon, definitely a little over-aggressive sometimes in the late game on the Wukong, but at least he was trying to make plays. At the end of the day, Mickey has to show up and has to be able to play here, and he just ruined the game for his team, even if his score doesn't look all that bad. So Mickey's definitely my choice for dud of the game. But what does that mean? Well, that means we're going into a Game 5, everybody. And Game 5 is certainly an interesting one because if Fnatic reverse sweeps Excel after the start to the series that Excel had, that is absurd. And Excel has to be losing their minds, especially with how Game 3 ended. So can that happen? Can Fnatic pull off the reverse sweep? We've seen a couple of teams be able to do it in the playoffs across a couple of regions so far this year. Can Fnatic add their name to that list and keep their playoff hopes alive? Or is Excel actually going to finish the job that they started? They were an inch away from the finish line and then they started posing. Is the tortoise going to beat the hare? The winner of game number 5 is Fnatic, as they do complete the reverse sweep of Excel. And oh my goodness, what a Game 5. This was one of the most dominant wins for Fnatic in the entire series. While Game 4 was definitely in their favor, like I said, a couple of changes, and Excel would certainly have been in it. This one just was a Fnatic win, and most of it, again, was off of the back of Razork, who really genuinely had a phenomenal series here for Fnatic. I've actually been a little bit lower, I think, on Razork than a majority of other people. I'm not going to say that he's been bad, but he's kind of just been all right for this Fnatic team. Certainly not a player that would be, like, on a top 4 team, in my opinion, but he really, really put in the work on this series against another very good jungler in Marcoon, somebody who I thought was better than him for a majority of the year. Razork really showed up. He played the Poppy here in Game 5, and he just controlled this map. Marcoon gets flexed to the Sejuani. They want to go with the Ornn into the top lane, into the Gwen. Fine matchup. Mickey gets put back on Yuumi, and you're just hoping that he sits on the AD carry this time, but Razork creates such an early game lead for Fnatic here with a very similar comp to what they've been running all series long here. They've got the Sylas back in the mid lane for Humanoid. Upset and Hilly get put back on the Lucian Nami, something they're very familiar with. And they just execute on it better. Razork is able to get Upset a ton of gold here in the bottom lane on the Lucian. He's able to make sure that Wonder is actually in a relatively good spot in the top lane on the Gwen, having a decent amount of gold and definitely a gold lead into Finn. Overall, just a really great series. I gotta give a lot of credit to Razork, but I also gotta give a lot of credit to Humanoid here. We talk about how Humanoid's been a disappointment in the regular season, but he really showed up in the clutch for this Fnatic team in this series. He wasn't that great in games 1 and 2, but at games 3 to 5, he was phenomenal for Fnatic, and a big reason why they were actually able to take the series. Another really good game of Sylas from him. Going back into the Ahri matchup, he already knows how to win. He outplays Nukeduck again and is able to control the matchup. Overall, really good series from this mid-jungle duo. I actually think they were the 2 biggest pieces here in Fnatic's series win. But Upset and Hilly definitely played well. I would say they were out. Patrick was the best player in the bottom lane, but unfortunately for him, he also probably had the worst player in the bottom lane here in Mickey in this series, who just really couldn't get his shit together long enough to give Excel a chance to win any of these last few games. But Upset and Hilly definitely took advantage of the opportunities that they were given. They weren't often given a lot of early opportunities, but on the Lucian Nami here in Game 5, they definitely had the most they had all series, and they were able to execute on it, so you have to be proud of them for that. And then Wunder was fine. Really, definitely had some moments in this series where he was a little bit troll, but at the end of the day, he made the plays when he needed to on the Gragas in Game 3, on the Gwen here in Game 5, to be able to help Fnatic secure the win and move on in the playoffs. As for Excel, your season's over, and your season, you can't, no offense, you have no one to blame but yourself. Like, this was the most winnable possible series you could have been given. You were up 2-0, and you should have won Game 3, but you make that call that you're gonna think about all offseason long. You couldn't quite get it done. I feel bad for Patrick. He played a really good series here against Fnatic. I think you can make a real case that Patrick was the best player in this series. He really was that good in terms of positioning, but nobody else on this team really stood up for him. Even in some of their wins, it really felt like Finn and Marcoon and Mickey were just kind of trolling a bit, and so definitely feel bad for Patrick, but at the end of the day, this is a team game. You can't just be the only good player on your team and expect to win, so unfortunately, the top side really couldn't hold up. Finn's going to get my dud of the game here in Game 5, but I think you could realistically give that to Marcoon as well, who just got out-jungled by Razork. Finn getting beaten up by Wunder in the top lane in Game 5 certainly wasn't great either, but Finn had his moments in this series as well. So overall, you just have to say for Excel, unfortunate. Your season's over, and you got to hate that. This is a team that I definitely think had Worlds aspirations, and it really, really sucks that they're not going to be able to achieve that this year, but you have a lot of good young pieces on this team. Marcoon and Patrick were phenomenal this year. Whether or not the rest of the team was able to support that, I think is up for debate. Finn certainly had his moments, but certainly towards the back half of the split was not all that good. Nuke Duck was up and down. Mickey was mostly down. I think you keep the core of Marcoon and Patrick, and you look to build a world caliber team going into next year. You certainly have the exposure to do it, and I really, really hope that this team can actively do that. But as for now, their season is over. Remember, no regionals in the LEC, so their season is over. Fnatic's, on the other hand, is still alive. They're going to be playing Misfits. We will be detailing that matchup in just a bit, but congratulations to this Fnatic team. Razork is going to get my player of the series here. He was phenomenal for Fnatic. Even in their losses, he was really the one that was keeping the game alive for Fnatic. I think you would realistically give Humanoid this award as well. He was a little bit worse in their losses, but definitely showed up in the clutch when they needed him the most. And this is the Fnatic team that you hope to see, not the first two games, but the final one here in Game 5. If you get a good version of Fnatic, they really do have a chance to just be a better team top to bottom than what Misfits has going for them. It's just always going to be the consistency with this team, but they're going to have to feel super confident coming out of the series with a reverse sweep, and hopefully they can carry that momentum into a huge series for the final world spot against Misfits. All right, but that is going to do it, finally, for all three first-round series here in the LEC playoffs. One of the longest videos I'm going to be putting out all year, but we're not done yet because we still have the previews for the upcoming second round here. We are going to be previewing our round 2 matchup here to decide our 4th seed, as well as our semi-final matchup, our winner's final matchup. So let's go ahead and get that started with these matchup to determine the last team that goes to Worlds. We know G2's going, we know Rogue's going, we know Mad Lions are going. Who is going to be that 4th and final team to go to Worlds? Will it be the number 4 Misfits Gaming or the number 5 Fnatic? It's definitely going to be an interesting series here that a lot of people are looking forward to. Let's go ahead and talk about how these two teams match up against each other. Well, there are certainly some really, really intriguing matchups here. I think you could talk about the jungle matchup, both of those junglers being really, really interesting. Most notably, Razork against his former team here. Zanzra obviously coming in halfway through the season and really stepping up for Misfits. I think that's going to be an incredibly intriguing matchup, especially because both of them really like to generate early leads, and both of them lean towards kind of different champions, where I think Razork likes to go for those more aggressive picks, things like the Wukong, things like the Viego, even the Vi are things that Razork has gone to, whereas Zanzra obviously has his kind of corral of champions that, while they do like early pressure, are a little bit more team supportive, things like the Skarner, things like the Poppy, the Trundle. Those are the picks that I think Zanzra is a little bit more accustomed to, and I think that dichotomy could be very interesting if Razork is able to get a pretty early lead here on Zanzra. We could definitely be looking at a matchup that favors Fnatic, whereas Zanzra, I think, is definitely better at enabling his laners, and I think that that could definitely be a matchup that favors Misfits if the lanes get ahead. The top lane matchup is definitely interesting. Irrelevant's been a very good weak side top laner, and Wunder's been the opposite of that. He's not weak side at all. He likes to play aggressive picks. Even when he plays the tanks, he plays them aggressively. So it's going to be interesting. Oftentimes, I will favor the more aggressive player when going into someone who likes to play more passive, but Irrelevant is a very, very solid player, and I can very much see a world in which Irrelevant can take this lane matchup in some of the games. You also have a very interesting bot lane matchup and bot lane dichotomy between these two teams. Upset and Neon are the late game threats for both of these teams, most specifically Neon here, who really, Misfits really relies on him to be able to win the game in the late game if they are remotely even or even behind. Neon is given a lot of responsibility to be that guy that positions well in team fights and really puts his team in an opportunity. Mersa does a really good job of following up with that. Obviously, a more engaged style support in a more Enchanter style meta, but Mersa is a very good engaged player, and honestly to the point where it really doesn't matter that a lot of the champions he plays aren't all that meta. He still is able to execute on them in a way that's just better than what a lot of people are able to stop. But obviously we know what Upset's capable of. He's probably a better player than Neon. He's just not given nearly as much responsibility. That can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing for Fnatic. Obviously, in a pure AD carry duel, it could be a very interesting dynamic to see Neon get a bunch of resources. Upset maybe not get nearly as many resources, and who would come out on top in that matchup. But you've also got Hillisang, who's very willing to make sure that the people on his team have resources, and also, quite frankly, very willing to make sure the people on the enemy team have a lot of resources. So definitely an interesting matchup here. Worth noting that Fnatic and Misfits have played 3 times this year instead of 2, because they did play in the tiebreaker at the end of the season. Misfits won the first game between them. Fnatic actually won to force that tiebreaker game, and then Misfits won the tiebreaker to put themselves in upper bracket. So certainly an interesting proposition between these two teams, but that leads us into my key matchup of the series. It's the only one we haven't talked about left. It's going to be the mid lane matchup here between Humanoid and VTO. Now, this is really where I think the series will be decided. You can look at the numbers for Humanoid: first in damage percentage, first in damage per minute, second in damage per gold percentage, third in gold difference of 15. He plays very much for himself, and I don't mean that to say he's a selfish player. I more so just mean to say he is someone who likes to get resources and likes to be the central focus, more so than a team like Misfits, where VTO, yes, is the central focus, but it's not so much because VTO has all the gold. It's more so the fact that wherever VTO goes, the gold goes through. And VTO really is the enabler for Misfits. If VTO has a lead, Misfits is typically in a very good spot. If VTO doesn't have a lead like we saw in the G2 series, it can be very difficult for this Misfits team to find a different avenue to win. Humanoid is one of the few mid laners that has the talent to be able to go one-on-one with VTO in lane, and that's what makes this matchup so interesting. But Humanoid is also the most risky mid laner in the region right now, where Misfits spends a lot of time playing around that mid lane, and Humanoid is someone who really falters under pressure, especially jungle pressure. And so it could be definitely an interesting matchup. Whichever side ends up getting the advantage of this, I highly expect them to be able to win the series overall. If Humanoid is able to just beat VTO, I don't see Misfits having much of a chance. But if Misfits can take advantage of a lot of the positioning weaknesses that Humanoid has shown, especially early in games, I could see Fnatic having a really hard time climbing out of that hole. So it's definitely going to be an intriguing matchup that I'm excited for, but these two teams are going to be fighting for the last spot at Worlds, and I think both deserve it. It would be awesome if Fnatic could get it because they're a historic organization, and really, what is Worlds without Fnatic? But this is Misfits' last split in the LEC. They sold their spot. If they could make Worlds in their last split, what a storyline that would be. So I'm really excited to see this as the matchup here, and it's really going to be a good one no matter what. That's going to bring us to our next series that we are previewing here. We just previewed the 4-5 matchup for the last seed at Worlds from the LEC. But now we get to preview a matchup between two teams that have already locked their World spots and are now just fighting for the LEC trophy and for Worlds seeding. Of course, I'm talking about winners finals between the number 1 seeded G2 Esports and the number 2 seeded Rogue team, both of whom won their first round series, guaranteeing their spot at Worlds. But this is certainly an intriguing matchup here in winners finals that we very well could be seeing twice here in winners finals and then maybe in grand finals as well, as both of these teams look really good. Let's talk about where I think these teams have some advantages versus where they have some disadvantages. Let's start with the bottom lane this time, because you've got Comp and Trimby taking on Falcon and Targamas. Now, I think a lot of people would see this as a little bit more of an even matchup, but in my opinion, I honestly think Rogue has a little bit of an advantage in this lane. I think Comp is, in my opinion, a tier above Flakkid in terms of what he's been able to put out this year. And Trimby and Comp work really well as a duo, even if I would take Targamas over Trimby. I think both of these bot lanes are very consistent, but Rogue certainly plays around there significantly more, whereas G2 certainly has a power lane somewhere else, or at least two power lanes somewhere else. I think Rogue really likes to play through comp and really likes to make sure that he can get to that point in the mid to late game where he can be really strong. This is a team that really thrives in that late game, that 20 minutes and plus of the game, and a lot of that is because of how consistent comp has been in a lot of these late game team fights. So I would give a small edge to Rogue in that respect. But that leads us into some of the other lanes that we have to talk about, the mid lane matchup here. Caps versus Larssen. As much as I think a lot of people like Larssen, this is Caps favored. I don't really think it's all that close. Caps has looked to be unstoppable when he's playing his best. He obliterated VTO in the first round, and I think VTO is a much better player than Larssen. And so it's a very, very intriguing matchup here, but at the end of the day, Caps should be able to get a sizable lead here. Now, this kind of contrasts with the bot lane where, you know, for comp, he gets a lot of resources and is given a lot of responsibility to be the late game for this team. Caps is in a very similar boat for G2, where he is often given a lot of the resources and set up in a position to be the late game carry. If comp can get really strong for Rogue, and if Caps can get really strong for G2, I think it's going to be a really intriguing matchup to see which of those two sides is going to be more efficient with that, because you still have Flacken and Targamas, you still have Larssen, who are going to be able to show up at least a little bit in the back half. So that matchup's interesting, even if it is definitely G2 favored. And then a very even matchup in the top lane here, Broken Blade versus Otoamne. I think Broken Blade is definitely a little bit more aggressive than Otoamne, but Broken Blade's also gotten significantly more consistent as the year has gone on. I think he's gotten a lot better at playing these more aggressive picks, but in a way where he doesn't need jungle attention all the time. Otoamne, definitely a weak side king, not afraid to play these more aggressive picks. Gangplank was his most played champion in summer, and very similar for Broken Blade. Neither of them are really one to back down, I think, from a challenge. I think both, you know, are willing to pick the Gwens, the Nars, these more aggressive picks, maybe even the Aatroxes, these more aggressive picks in the top lane that are a little bit more meta right now. And I could definitely see a world in which they challenge each other, but I could also see a world in which both teams kind of see it fit to go a more tank-style matchup in the top lane, kind of take some resources out of there and invest them into other places. I could see both happening, but either way, I actually think top lane is pretty even. That leads us, though, with our only matchup left, our key matchup of the series here, and it's going to be in the jungle, as we have Jankos versus Malrang. And both of these teams really, really rely on their junglers for early game pressure here. Most especially Rogue, where Rogue, I think, really lacks an early game identity, especially without Malrang. G2 at least has some idea of what they like to do in the early game, which is just win their lanes, because they're so mechanically talented in the 1v1 or the 2v2, depending on the lane, right? That they can kind of win their lanes without it, and Jankos can get a lot of map pressure and then decide to distribute it wherever he needs to go. Malrang really is the key that unlocks a lot of Rogue's early game. They don't typically play very aggressive in any of their lanes so long as they don't feel like they have a lot of pressure from Malrang to back them up. It really is his decisions in the early game that decide what Rogue wants to do, and Jankos could be a player that exploits that. We've seen him do it multiple times in both of the matchups with Rogue this year that G2 has won both times. Jankos has been able to have a significantly more impactful early game than Malrang, and it gets to this point where G2 is just more talented, and even if the other lanes go fine for Rogue, if Jankos is able to spread that wealth a little bit to players like Broken Blade, to players like Caps, G2 is just able to get a significant lead. So I really think the early game between these two junglers is going to be hyper important for both of these teams, and I'm really excited to see how it plays out. But no matter really what happens between these two teams, obviously both of them are already going to Worlds. The winner will be guaranteed not in the play-ins. Obviously, both the 3rd and 4th seed for the LEC are in play-ins, so you do have to make LEC finals in order to not have to be in play-ins, but that opens up an opportunity for both of these teams to solidify their spot at Worlds in the group stage with a win here. Obviously, I think that a lot of people are going to predict one way over the other, but there is certainly a world in which both of these teams come out with a win, and I'm excited to see how they show up and how they play against each other here in a very important series. All right, that is going to do it, though, for my LEC Round 1 overview and analysis of all 3 series, as well as my predictions for the 4-5 matchup, as well as the winners finals here. A very long episode. This is the longest playoff video I've had in a very, very long time. I've got almost 4 hours of raw audio to edit down here, and I know I say this at the end of all my videos, but if you guys enjoyed, I really would appreciate you leaving a like on this one. This one was definitely time-consuming and difficult to make. We had 14 games to go over and 2 series to preview. A very, very difficult task, but we got it done here today, and I really, really hope that if you guys enjoy the content that you are, you know, liking it, because it really does mean a lot to me. Like, it really, 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 really does show me that you guys enjoy it. That really is what it's about. You know, it's not, obviously, you know, these videos aren't the most watched videos on the planet or anything like that, but those likes do show me that there are people out there who are enjoying the content and do enjoy the recaps that I go over. And if you are one of those people, I highly recommend you just hit that button, because it really does mean a lot to show me that you guys are enjoying the hours that I'm putting into this. So I really, really do appreciate it. Obviously, we've got a lot of really good series here to cover. My predictions for the 2 series that we're going to be getting here. Misfits versus Fnatic, I predicted this series would happen, and in my playoff predictions, I predicted Fnatic winning this. I'm certainly not confident in that, but I think I'm going to stick with it. I really have no reason to flip my opinion right now. I think Misfits is in a pretty good spot to win this series, but I think Fnatic is just more talented of a team, and as long as they stick to their guns, I would expect them to be able to win. As for G2 Rogue, G2 should be the better team. Like, G2 should honestly just beat everybody in the LEC. I really think that they are a tier above everybody in the LEC, in my opinion, and they should be able to handle Rogue here just like they did in the regular season. But it could be relatively close, and Misfits Fnatic will certainly be a fun series no matter what. So I'm excited for these upcoming games. If you are too, let me know down in the comment section below. Who are you picking between G2 and Rogue? Who are you picking between Misfits and Fnatic? Let me know your opinions. I like to hear the consensus. I like to hear how people feel down in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys are feeling for those matchups. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.